"We'll freeze if we don't stay close," the Apache woman warned. The rancher had no choice. John Carter had spent most of his life on the open plains of New Mexico. From sunrise to sunset, the ranch had been his world. The land, the cattle, the horses, everything demanded attention, patience, and respect. He had grown used to the rhythm of life in the wild, where each season brought its own challenges, and where a single mistake could cost weeks of hard work, or worse, a life. John had survived harsh summers, dry spells, and icy winters, but something about this year felt different. The wind had begun to carry a strange chill, whispering through the sagebrush in a way that made him pause. That morning he was preparing for a trip he had taken countless times before. He needed to check on his herd, which grazed in the highlands beyond the main ranch. Normally he would have gone alone. He prided himself on his independence, believing that no one could handle the ranch as well as he could. But as he saddled his horse, Dusty, a feeling of unease tugged at him. Something about the clouds rolling over the distant mountains made him hesitate. The sky was gray and heavy, not with the soft white of winter snow, but with a sharp, threatening tone that hinted at storms to come. John shook his head. He had seen storms before and had always managed to navigate through them. Still, the wind carried a warning in its howl. He paused to tighten the straps on Dusty's saddle, glancing toward the small town in the valley below. The few townspeople he passed had mentioned the cold front, warning him to be careful. But John had always been careful. He didn't need advice from anyone.
He prided himself on knowing the land, reading its moods like the lines on his own hands.
As he prepared to leave, he noticed a figure standing at the edge of the road. She was a woman, her dark hair tied back neatly and her clothes simple but worn with careful attention. She didn't rush toward him, didn't wave or call, but her eyes seemed to measure him as if she could see beyond the surface into the heart of his thoughts. John slowed Dusty, curious despite himself. "Morning," he said cautiously. "Can I help you?" The woman did not smile, but she nodded politely. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm but carried a firmness that made John sit up straighter.
"You're planning to go up into the highlands," she said. "The storm will reach the plains sooner than you expect."
John raised an eyebrow. "Buh."
"I've handled storms before," he replied. "I know this land."
Pay.
I can manage. She shook her head gently. This is different.
You will not manage alone. The snow will come, and if you are not careful, you will freeze. There was no arrogance in her tone, no judgment, just a quiet certainty that made John uneasy. "Who are you?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "My name is Mika," she said simply. "I know these mountains, these plains. I know the storms. Stay close to me and you will survive. Go alone and you may not." John felt a mix of skepticism and something else he could not name. There was an authenticity in her eyes, a connection to the land that he had always considered his alone. He had grown up here, worked harder than most, and yet something about Mika's presence made him pause. Pride wrestled with caution. Bad.
For years, he had trusted his instincts and experience, but a calm certainty challenged that confidence.
He looked at the sky again. The clouds were gathering, moving faster than usual, and a cold wind swept over the plains, carrying with it a biting edge.
Even Dusty, normally unshakable, twitched his ears nervously.
John's own instincts, honed by decades of life in the wild, began to whisper the same warning Mika had just given. "All right," he said finally, his voice low. "I'll listen. But you need to know, I'm used to this land.
I move fast, I handle my own. You follow me if you want, but I'm not going slow for anyone. Mika nodded once. We stay together.
We move carefully. That is all you need to know. The land will show us the path if we respect it. There was no arguing with her tone.
John knew the type. People who spoke with the confidence of someone who had lived the land long enough to feel its heartbeat. He could sense that she had survived storms before, that she understood dangers he could not see.
Bass. Against his pride, he felt a spark of relief. Maybe, just maybe, her presence could make the difference between a routine trip and a dangerous mistake. They set off together, John leading Dusty along the familiar paths, while Mika walked beside him, her steps steady and sure despite the rocky terrain. The cold grew sharper as they ascended, cutting through the layers of clothing John had worn. He had prepared for winter, but there was something in the air that spoke of harsher cold than he had expected. Mika's presence was reassuring. She pointed out subtle signs, the way the clouds bent, the movement of the birds, the strange patterns of frost on the rocks. Each observation was simple, yet revealed a depth of knowledge John had never thought to notice.
See those rocks over there? She said, pointing to a ridge just ahead. The wind will hit from the north in about an hour.
It will be stronger than you think. Keep your horse close. We do not want to be separated when the storm comes. John nodded, feeling a tension in his chest. Separation was dangerous. That much he knew. He realized then that his confidence alone was not enough. Experience could not substitute for knowledge shared in time. He tightened Dusty's reins and whispered to the horse to stay calm. Mika walked beside him silently, her eyes scanning the horizon, her presence steadying him more than he wanted to admit. As the sun began to dip behind the distant mountains, the temperature dropped even further. The wind began to carry snow, thin at first, then thicker, swirling around them like tiny white dancers in the fading light.
John felt the first real sense of urgency.
This was no ordinary winter day. He glanced at Micah, who had already adjusted her pace, keeping Dusty close to him. Her calmness contrasted with his rising anxiety, and he felt a strange mix of relief and humility.
The first lesson of the journey became clear. Survival was not about rushing, not about relying solely on strength or knowledge earned alone.
It was about listening, observing, and moving carefully with someone who understood the land in a way he could not.
Mika's warning echoed in his mind. We'll freeze if we don't stay close.
By the time they reached a small plateau with a clear view of the surrounding plains, the snow had begun to settle in thick layers.
John could see tracks of animals hidden beneath the white patterns in the earth that only someone like Mika could interpret. He realized he was seeing more than just a storm approaching. He was seeing a lesson in humility, in respect for forces beyond his control. They made camp for the night in a sheltered hollow, using rocks to shield themselves from the biting wind. John worked quickly, stacking firewood and tending to Dusty, while Mika moved with precision, arranging the small camp to maximize warmth and safety. Around the fire, she taught him small techniques: how to read the smoke to judge wind direction, how to find natural shelter, and how to conserve energy in extreme cold. John listened, absorbing her words. Each small piece of knowledge was valuable, and he could feel his pride softening under the weight of practical wisdom. The night grew colder, the wind howling outside their little hollow, and for the first time in years John felt the fragile certainty of survival rest not solely on his own shoulders, but shared with another who understood the land as deeply as he thought he did. As he lay down beside the fire, he thought about the storm ahead. He thought about the warning, the words that had stayed with him all day. "We'll freeze if we don't stay close." John knew that the coming hours would test him in ways he could not yet imagine, but for the first time he felt a quiet confidence. not just in himself, but in the shared strength of knowledge, trust, and respect for the land. He drifted to sleep to the sound of the wind outside, thinking that tomorrow the journey would truly begin. And when it did, he would be ready to move together, staying close, just as Mika had said. The next morning, John woke to a world transformed. Overnight, the snow had fallen thick and white, covering the plains and hills like a soft blanket. The wind had calmed slightly, but the cold was sharper now, biting through even the thickest layers of clothing. Dusty pawed at the snow nervously, stamping his hooves to keep warm. John rubbed the horse's neck and whispered softly, trying to calm him. Mika was already awake, crouched near the small fire, carefully tending to the embers to make sure it did not die out. She looked up at John and nodded. There was a quiet urgency in her eyes, and John realized that the storm they had seen yesterday was only the beginning. The snow would continue, and the temperature would drop even further as the day went on. "Good morning," John said, his voice rough from the cold. He moved closer to the fire to warm his hands. "Morning, Mika," replied, her voice calm, steady, but carrying the same warning from the previous day. "The storm will grow stronger as we move. We must stay close, watch each other, and follow the land. The snow can hide dangers if you do not pay attention." John nodded, feeling a mix of anxiety and respect. He had spent years reading the land himself, but there was something different in the way Mika observed it. Her eyes seemed to notice even the smallest details, the way the wind shifted around the rocks, the subtle patterns of frost on the ground, the movement of a distant herd of deer that he had almost missed. He realized that her knowledge of the wilderness was far beyond his own experience. They set off, John riding Dusty while Mika walked beside him, moving easily over the snowy ground. Breaths. The cold air made their breaths visible, puffing out in small clouds with each step. The snow was deep in some areas, making the journey slower and more exhausting than John had expected. He adjusted Dusty's pace carefully, mindful of the uneven ground hidden beneath the white layer. "See that ridge over there?" Mika said, pointing to a series of jagged rocks ahead. "The wind will hit from that side soon. Keep your horse steady. Watch for hidden ice beneath the snow." John nodded and guided Dusty carefully, keeping close to Mika as she had instructed. He noticed how naturally she moved through the landscape, her steps sure and confident, even where the snow was thickest. Her presence was reassuring, but it also reminded him how vulnerable he truly was in the face of the storm. As they climbed higher, the snow began to fall more heavily. The wind picked up, swirling around them, and visibility dropped. John had expected cold, but he had not anticipated the sheer intensity of the blizzard. Every step became a careful calculation. Dusty stumbled occasionally, forcing John to lean forward and steady him. Mika's voice cut through the wind, calm and precise. "Slow down. Do not risk falling," she said. "The snow hides holes and ice. One wrong step can turn the path into danger." John realized she was right. His pride and confidence had been useful in calm conditions, but now the storm was testing every skill he had. He began to see the snow not just as a challenge, but as a teacher. It demanded respect, attention, and caution. The only way forward was together, moving carefully, staying close, and trusting one another. Hours passed, and the snow continued to fall. The wind howled around them, carrying sharp flakes that cut against their faces. John's hands ached from the cold, despite his gloves, and Dusty was tiring under the weight of the snow. Mika's presence kept him grounded. She offered small tips: how to angle the horse's steps on ice patches, how to recognize snowdrifts that could hide rocks, and how to conserve energy in freezing conditions. "You must conserve strength," she said. "Every step uses more energy in snow than you think. We move carefully, not quickly." They stopped occasionally to rest, finding natural shelters behind rocky outcrops where the wind was less harsh. John learned to appreciate the small breaks. The warmth of the fire Mika quickly built using dry branches she had spotted beneath the snow. Prepabatis. During one of these rests, John began to notice the subtle signs of wildlife around them. Tracks of rabbits, deer, and even a coyote were visible in the fresh snow. Mika pointed them out, explaining what they meant about the wind, the snow, and the coming storm. Each observation was small, yet together they painted a picture of the landscape that John had never fully understood. He felt a growing respect for the knowledge she carried. Knowledge earned not in books or stories, but in lived experience and careful observation. By midday, the snow was falling steadily, covering their tracks and making the path forward uncertain. The cold was relentless, and John felt the first real pangs of fear. It was not panic, but the awareness that the storm could turn dangerous quickly. He glanced at Mika, who seemed unaffected by the cold, her movements fluid and precise. Her calmness was a steady anchor, reminding him that fear could be managed with focus and preparation. They continued to move, navigating small ridges and shallow valleys, keeping Dusty close. The horse was experienced, but even he was showing signs of fatigue. John offered encouragement, patting his neck and whispering to him. Mika adjusted her pace to match his, offering quiet advice on footing and direction. The partnership between them grew more seamless with every step. As the afternoon sun began to dip behind the clouds, the storm intensified. Snowflakes whipped sideways, and visibility dropped to mere meters. John realized that without Mika's guidance, he could easily become lost. The wind was merciless, carrying the sharp sting of freezing temperatures directly to exposed skin. He tightened his scarf, pulled his coat closer, and focused on following her movements.
Keep close, Mika reminded him, her voice carrying over the wind. Do not let the storm separate us.
That is the greatest danger now. John obeyed, keeping Dusty near and moving in careful, measured steps. The snow created illusions of depth, hiding dips and ridges in the ground. Each step was a test of judgment and patience. He found himself thinking less about pride and more about survival. The lesson was clear. Experience alone was not enough.
Respect for the storm, for the land, and for the knowledge of someone who understood it fully was what kept them alive. By evening, they reached a small ridge overlooking a frozen stream below.
Mika pointed to a sheltered area near some boulders, suggesting they stop for the night. Pain. John dismounted, his muscles sore from hours of careful riding and walking through snow. He felt an odd sense of humility, a recognition that his years on the land had prepared him for many challenges, but not this storm alone. They built a fire quickly, using dry wood that Mika had spotted hidden beneath the snow. The warmth was a relief, though brief, as the cold continued to seep through their clothing. John watched the flames, feeling the exhaustion of the day settling into his bones. He realized that every decision he had made, every choice to trust Mika, had kept them safe. Without her guidance, the day could have ended in disaster. While Dusty rested, Mika shared small lessons about the land. She pointed out wind directions, subtle changes in snow patterns, and even signs of nearby wildlife that might indicate dangers or safe paths. John listened closely, absorbing everything. Best. Her knowledge was practical and immediate, and he realized that this was the type of wisdom he had never learned from anyone else. As night fell, the snowstorm slowed slightly, but the cold intensified. They huddled close near the fire, sharing warmth in the silence of the high plains. John reflected on the day, thinking about how fragile life could be when the elements turned against you. He thought about the people he had trusted in the past, the lessons he had learned from mistakes, and how much more there was to understand. Mika's words from the morning stayed in his mind. We must stay close.
The snow can hide dangers if you do not pay attention. He realized that survival was not just about strength or experience, but about awareness, humility, and partnership.
The bond they were forming was becoming crucial, not just for the journey, but for understanding the land itself. As he finally settled down for the night, John felt a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. The day had tested him in ways he had not expected, forcing him to reconsider his own abilities and limitations. He understood now that the journey ahead would be even more challenging, and that the lessons of today would be vital for the trials yet to come. The snow continued to fall softly around their camp, covering their tracks and shaping the landscape into something both beautiful and dangerous. John closed his eyes, listening to the wind and the quiet sounds of Dusty breathing. He felt a new respect for the wilderness, for Mika, and for the simple truth that survival demanded more than pride. It demanded wisdom, patience, and closeness to those who shared the journey. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, deeper snow, and harsher winds. But John knew that he was not facing them alone. He had learned to trust Mika, to follow her guidance, and to respect the land in ways he had never done before. And for the first time in his life, he felt that survival was not just about enduring. It was about learning, adapting, and moving together with someone who truly understood the world around them. The morning broke, but it brought no relief. The snowstorm that had been building yesterday had transformed into a full-blown blizzard. The wind whipped across the plains with relentless force, carrying tiny shards of ice that cut like knives against exposed skin. The world beyond their small shelter was almost unrecognizable. Every familiar landmark was hidden under a thick white veil, and even the distant mountains had vanished into the swirling snow. Beth. John shivered as he tightened his coat around his shoulders. The cold was sharper than anything he had felt before. Dusty pawed at the frozen ground nervously, snorting into the wind as if sensing the danger that surrounded them. John's own stomach knotted with a mixture of fear and responsibility. He knew that one misstep now, one moment of carelessness, could cost them dearly. Mika was already awake, moving calmly around the small fire they had managed to keep alive through the night. Breath. Her movements were precise, almost effortless, as she rearranged logs and fed the flames, keeping it small but strong. She glanced at John and nodded. "We must leave soon," she said, her voice steady, carrying over the wind.
"The storm is strong, but we cannot wait here."
"The snow will only trap us more." John nodded, swallowing his rising anxiety. He had survived storms before, yes, but never like this. The wind roared in his ears, and the blizzard reduced visibility to mere feet. Each step forward would be a careful calculation, each movement deliberate. He looked at Mika, noticing again how composed she remained. Her calmness was a steady anchor in the chaos around them. They set off, John leading Dusty slowly, while Mika walked close beside him. The snow was deep and uneven, making progress slow and exhausting. Each step required effort, as their boots and Dusty's hooves sank into the drifts. The wind blew constantly, forcing them to shield their faces and squint through the icy air. John could barely see beyond the edge of Dusty's mane, and even then, the horse stumbled over hidden ice patches. "Careful," Mika said, her voice firm. "The snow hides holes in rocks. Bet, one wrong step can hurt you, or the horse." John adjusted Dusty's reins, taking extra care to navigate each uncertain footstep. The blizzard made him nervous, but he forced himself to focus, block out the panic rising inside him. Birth. Survival now depended on patience, awareness, and trust. Mika's guidance had become more than advice. It was a lifeline. Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of letting up. The wind carried sharp, freezing flakes that made every movement painful. Dusty slowed, exhausted from the effort of moving through the deep snow. John encouraged him softly, patting his neck, whispering words of reassurance. Mika stayed beside them, her steps smooth and purposeful, scanning the terrain for safe paths, teaching John to read the subtle changes in snow and wind that could signal hidden dangers.
You must stay close, Mika reminded him repeatedly. If we separate, even for a moment, the snow will take you.
Dispose. The storm does not forgive. John nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that this was no ordinary journey. The storm was alive, dangerous, and unpredictable. It demanded respect, focus, and constant awareness.
He followed her every move, trusting her judgment, and felt a quiet admiration for the way she navigated the chaos. The cold began to sink into his bones despite his layers of clothing.
His fingers grew numb, his breath came in ragged clouds, and Dusty's legs shook from fatigue. Mika stopped occasionally to check him and the horse, offering small bits of encouragement and advice. She showed him how to angle the horse's steps on hidden ice, how to distribute their weight to avoid sinking too deeply into drifts, and how to read the wind for subtle changes in direction and strength. By midday, the storm had reached its peak.
The blizzard was so intense that John could barely see Mika's silhouette beside him. The wind roared in his ears, drowning out all other sounds.
Snow whipped sideways, stinging his face and eyes. Every step forward was a struggle against exhaustion, fear, and nature itself. John began to feel panic creeping in. He had survived difficult winters before, but never one so relentless. He glanced at Mika, who remained calm, her eyes scanning the white expanse for any signs of danger or safe footing. Her presence grounded him, reminding him that fear alone would not help them survive. He forced himself to breathe steadily, keep moving, and focus on the lessons she had taught him. After what felt like hours, they reached a small depression in the land, partially sheltered by rocks and a few hardy trees. Mika suggested they take a brief rest, though the wind still whipped around them. They dismounted, Dusty snorting and stamping in the snow. The cold was overwhelming, but the brief pause gave John a moment to gather his strength. Listen to the land, Mika said, kneeling to check the horse's hooves. The snow tells you where it is safe. Look at the patterns. Watch for hidden ice and drifts. The land speaks if you pay attention.
John followed her instructions, noticing subtle changes in the snow he had missed before.
He began to see that the blizzard, while fierce, had patterns, signs, and clues that could guide them. He realized that survival was not about fighting the storm blindly. It was about moving carefully, observing, and adapting.
As they continued, the blizzard grew even harsher. Visibility dropped to just a few feet.
The cold seemed to seep through everything, making muscles ache and fingers numb. Dusty's pace slowed, and John felt a pang of fear for the horse. Mika stayed close, offering advice on footing and direction, helping them navigate safely through the white chaos. The afternoon dragged on, each hour feeling longer than the last. The blizzard was unrelenting, testing their endurance, patience, and courage.
John's mind kept wandering to what might happen if they strayed from each other, if the snow claimed one of them.
The thought made his chest tighten. He realized that Mika's warning yesterday, "We'll freeze if we don't stay close," was more than advice.
It was a rule for survival. Despite the danger, John found himself learning, growing, and adapting in ways he never had before.
He watched Mika move through the storm with confidence, absorbing her techniques and noticing the small ways she conserved energy, protected the horse, and used the terrain to their advantage. Each observation gave him a new understanding of the wilderness, one he had never gained from experience alone.
By late afternoon, the storm began to slow slightly, though the cold remained harsh.
The two of them were exhausted, their muscles aching, and Dusty was struggling under the weight of the snow. They found a small outcrop of rocks that provided a natural windbreak and made camp for the night. Mika quickly built a small fire, carefully shielding it from the wind, and John helped, realizing that every small action could mean the difference between warmth and frostbite. Around the fire, John reflected on the day. He had faced his first real blizzard, and without Mika he knew he would have been lost. The experience had humbled him, teaching him that survival depended not just on skill or strength, but on awareness, patience, and trust. He felt a quiet gratitude for her guidance and for the knowledge she had shared so freely. Mika spoke little during their rest, but when she did, it was with calm wisdom. "The storm tests us," she said. "It reveals our strengths and our mistakes. We survive not because we are strong alone, but because we learn and adapt together." John nodded, feeling the truth of her words. Yes. He realized that his pride had always pushed him to face challenges alone, but the storm had shown him that even the most experienced person could be vulnerable without guidance. Mika's presence had been more than helpful. It had been essential. As the night deepened, the blizzard finally began to ease slightly, the wind losing some of its fury. The snow still fell, but more gently now, covering the plains in a quiet, soft blanket. John felt the exhaustion of the day settle into his bones, but he also felt a growing confidence. He had survived the storm so far, not just through his own skills, but through careful observation, patience, and trust in Mika. He watched the fire crackle and pop, sending small sparks into the cold air, and realized that the lesson of the day was clear. Survival required more than strength or experience. It required humility, awareness, and connection, not just with another person, but with the land itself. The blizzard had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and in doing so had taught John something he would not forget. As he lay down near the fire, with Dusty resting beside him and Mika keeping watch, John felt a deep respect for the wilderness and the knowledge that came from living closely with it. The storm had been fierce, terrifying, and exhausting, but it had also been a teacher, and he knew that the journey ahead would be no less challenging. The night stretched on, the wind howling outside, but for the first time John felt prepared. Not because he was invincible, but because he had learned to move carefully, stay close, and trust someone who truly understood the land. The storm had shown him the dangers of pride, the value of guidance, and the strength found in partnership. Tomorrow the snow would continue, the blizzard may return in force, and the path forward would be treacherous. But John knew that he was not alone. With Mika beside him, with Dusty steady under his care, and with the lessons of the storm etched into his mind, he was ready to face whatever came next. Survival was not just about endurance. It was about learning, adapting, and moving forward together. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by snow. The world was silent now, except for the occasional whistle of the wind and the soft crunch of their footsteps through fresh powder. John Carter and Mika stepped cautiously from their small shelter, surveying the high plains around them. The blizzard had left the ground uneven and unpredictable, but the worst of it had passed. Still, the cold was sharp, and every step required attention. John looked at Dusty, the horse's breath forming clouds in the icy air. The animal was exhausted but steady, its hooves carefully navigating the snow-packed ground. John rubbed Dusty's neck, murmuring softly to calm him. He felt a wave of gratitude for the animal's endurance, as well as for Mika's guidance. Without her, the storm could have cost them both their lives. "Good," Mika said quietly. "But the worst has passed. But the journey is not over. We must keep moving, or the snow will slow us too much. We must find shelter before nightfall." John nodded, feeling both relief and determination. The blizzard had tested him, but it had also taught him the importance of observation and patience. He realized that survival depended not only on strength but on awareness, adaptation, and trust. He followed Mika's lead as they moved, noticing how she scanned the terrain, reading the snow and wind as if they were words on a page. As they walked, Mika pointed out signs of the land that John had never noticed before. "See the frost on that rock?" she asked. "Bay. It shows which way the wind blew last night. The snow is softer there. The path we take must avoid hidden drifts that could trap us or slow us down." John studied the snow carefully, realizing that the landscape was telling a story he had never fully understood. Tracks of animals were visible in the snow, and Mika explained what each one meant. The direction the creatures had moved, whether they had found food, and what the presence of certain predators might indicate. Every observation was a lesson in survival, and John absorbed it all, feeling his respect for Mika grow. They moved slowly but steadily, making small but important stops to rest Dusty and themselves. Mika showed John how to conserve energy in the cold, demonstrating ways to position the horse's weight, how to move without slipping, and how to protect exposed skin from frostbite. John watched carefully, trying to mimic her movements and absorb her wisdom. Each step was deliberate, each decision important. By midday they found a small frozen creek, partially covered with snow. The water beneath the ice was still running, and Mika knelt beside it, testing the surface with a stick. "But
Not safe to walk on," she said. "But the stream tells us where the ground is softer."
facts.
Watch the edges for hidden paths. Nature provides if you pay attention.
John followed her instructions, carefully navigating the edges of the creek, guiding Dusty through the safer patches. It was slow work, but it kept them safe.
For the first time in years, John realized that survival was not about rushing forward or relying solely on experience. It was about observation, caution, and using knowledge wisely.
As they continued, Mika pointed out natural shelters along the route. Small rock formations, clusters of hardy trees, and shallow hollows that could block the wind. She taught John how to prepare temporary shelters, how to stack snow and rocks to create windbreaks, and how to find dry wood hidden beneath the snow for warmth. John listened intently, appreciating the practicality of her skills. During a brief rest, John asked Mika about her life. She spoke calmly, describing her connection to the land, the lessons passed down by her family, and the importance of respect for the wilderness. John realized that her knowledge was not just practical, but deeply rooted in experience and understanding of the world around her. He felt a growing respect not only for her skills, but for her wisdom and patience. As the afternoon progressed, the cold remained relentless. The snow was deep in some areas, making every step a challenge. Dusty's legs grew tired, and John had to adjust his pace to match the horse's endurance. By them, offering encouragement and guidance, pointing out easier paths through the snow, and showing John how to read the subtle signs of ice, hidden drifts, and uneven ground. By evening, the temperature had dropped further. They reached a small plateau with rocks providing some shelter from the wind. Mika quickly gathered dry wood and arranged a fire, using techniques she had taught John earlier. The warmth was a relief, though brief, as the cold still cut through layers of clothing. John tended Dusty while Mika managed the fire, feeling the satisfaction of teamwork and the growing trust between them. As night fell, the two shared stories of their lives, creating a bond that went beyond mere survival. John spoke of his years on the ranch, the challenges he had faced, and the pride he had taken in his independence. Mika listened patiently, occasionally sharing insights from her own experiences with the land. Through the quiet conversation, John realized that knowledge and wisdom were as important as physical strength. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks into the cold night air. The snow around them was thick, but the shelter they had built provided enough protection to rest. John felt a sense of gratitude for Micah's presence, recognizing that without her guidance the journey could have been deadly. The lessons of the day, careful observation, patience, and respect for the land, were etched deeply into his mind. During the night, the wind picked up slightly, but it no longer carried the sharp terror of the blizzard.
John watched Micah move with ease, tending the fire and checking on Dusty.
He realized that survival required more than endurance. It required adaptability, careful thinking, and the willingness to learn from those with experience. He felt a quiet humility, understanding that his pride and self-reliance, while valuable, were not enough to face nature's challenges alone. The following morning they prepared to move again. The snow was lighter, and the wind had eased, but the cold remained. Micah taught John techniques for moving efficiently through deep snow, distributing weight, and using the terrain to their advantage. Each lesson built on the last, creating a rhythm of movement that balanced caution with progress. John followed closely, absorbing every tip and practicing the skills she demonstrated. As they traveled, they encountered signs of wildlife, the tracks of deer, rabbits, and even a lone coyote. Micah explained how each sign indicated food sources, water, and potential dangers. John marveled at her ability to interpret these subtle clues and realized that understanding the land was as important as navigating it. The snow, the wind, and the tracks all told a story, and Micah had taught him to read it carefully. By midday, they reached a shallow valley where the snow was softer and the wind less harsh. Micah pointed out a natural shelter, a small cluster of rocks that would provide protection for the night. John dismounted and helped gather wood, arranging it carefully to maximize warmth. They built a small fire, and for the first time in days, John felt a sense of accomplishment and hope. As the fire burned, John reflected on the journey. The storm had tested him, pushing him to his limits, but it had also taught him valuable lessons. Survival was not about pride or speed. It was about awareness, adaptation, and trust. Micah's guidance had been crucial, and he realized that learning from her was as important as any skill he had developed on the ranch. The evening passed quietly, with the fire providing warmth and comfort. John and Micah shared another conversation, discussing the lessons of the storm, the importance of observing the land, and the value of patience and careful planning. John felt a deep respect for Micah, not only for her skills, but for the wisdom and calmness she brought to every situation. As night fell, John settled near the fire, reflecting on the day's progress. He had learned to move carefully, observe keenly, and trust someone else's guidance. The storm had shown him the limits of his own knowledge and the importance of humility in the face of nature's power. He felt a growing sense of connection, not only to Micah, but to the land itself. The snow around them was quiet, the wind gentle, and Dusty rested peacefully. John knew that the journey ahead would still be challenging, but he felt prepared. The lessons he had learned over the past 2 days, careful observation, patience, adaptability, and trust, had become second nature. He understood that survival was a continuous process of learning and adjusting, and that the bond he shared with Micah was a vital part of that process. As he closed his eyes for the night, John felt a quiet sense of determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he was no longer the same man who had set out at the beginning of the journey. He had grown, learned, and adapted. He had discovered the value of trust, the importance of careful observation, and the strength found in partnership. The land had tested him, and he had responded. John knew that the final stretch of the journey would require all the lessons he had learned. He would need to stay close to Micah, follow her guidance, and continue to respect the land's power. The snow, the wind, and the cold were formidable opponents, but he felt ready. He understood that survival was not just about enduring the storm. It was about learning from it, moving carefully, and working together. The morning air was crisp, but it carried a quiet calm. The storm that had tested John Carter and Mika for days had finally passed, leaving the world around them blanketed in fresh snow. The mountains and plains, once threatening and chaotic, now appeared serene and almost beautiful. Sunlight filtered softly through the clouds, reflecting off the white landscape. The silence was different this time. It was not filled with danger, but with a sense of clarity and reflection. John stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from days of careful movement through snow and wind. Dusty snorted softly, pawing at the snow, ready to continue. John rubbed the horse's neck, whispering words of encouragement. The animal had been through as much as they had, and its strength and endurance had been essential for their survival. He realized how much he had relied on Dusty, as much as on Mika's guidance. Mika was already moving, scanning the surroundings as she had done so many times before. Her eyes traced the patterns in the snow, noticing the subtle signs of where ice or drifts might make travel difficult. Inspiration. Her calm, deliberate movements reminded John of all the lessons she had shared over the past days. He felt a quiet admiration for her skill and her deep connection to the land. "We must move carefully," Mika said, her voice calm but firm. "The snow may hide dangers. Even though the storm is gone, we cannot be careless." John nodded, feeling both caution and confidence. But he had learned much in the past days, the importance of observation, patience, and adaptability. But more than that, he had learned to trust someone else's experience, to work together in the face of danger, and to respect the land itself. He understood now that survival was not just about strength or knowledge gained alone. It was about connection, awareness, and humility. They began their journey back toward the ranch, moving steadily but carefully. The path was still treacherous in places. Hidden ice and snowdrifts tested their concentration. John guided Dusty along safer tracks while Mika walked beside him, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. She pointed out areas where the snow was softer, or where rocks might be hidden, teaching John to move with precision and awareness. As they walked, the silence of the snow-covered plains gave John time to reflect. He thought about the pride he had carried with him before the storm, the confidence in his own experience that had nearly led to disaster. He realized that pride alone was not enough to survive nature's tests. He had learned that wisdom, humility, and the ability to observe and adapt were equally important. By midday, they reached a small ridge that offered a wide view of the surrounding plains. The landscape was breathtaking, the snow sparkling under the soft sunlight. John paused, taking in the scene, and felt a sense of awe. The land that had once seemed harsh and threatening now felt alive with possibility and quiet beauty. He realized that the storm had not only tested him but had also revealed the subtle strength and majesty of the world around him. Mika noticed his pause and smiled faintly. "The land teaches us in many ways," she said. "Through danger, through calm, and through patience. Respect it, and it will guide you." John nodded, absorbing the meaning of her words. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for her guidance, but for the experience itself. The blizzard had been terrifying, exhausting, and challenging, but it had also taught him lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. He understood now that survival was not about facing danger alone. It was about learning from it, respecting it, and moving carefully with those who understood it. As they continued, they encountered small signs of life, a rabbit hopping through the snow, tracks of deer, and the distant call of a hawk. Mika explained how each sign indicated the health of the land, the presence of food and water, and the balance of nature.
John listened, fascinated by the depth of her understanding.
Despot. He realized that she had taught him more than survival techniques. She had shown him how to see the land as a living, breathing system, full of signs, lessons, and guidance. By late afternoon, they approached the familiar rolling hills near John's ranch.
The sight of the homestead brought a mixture of relief and reflection. The ranch had been his world before, but now it felt different.
He looked at the snow-covered fields, the fences, and the grazing areas, seeing them with new eyes. The land was not just a place of work or ownership. It was a partner, a teacher, and a force to respect.
Dusty trotted steadily, sensing that the journey was nearing its end. John felt a sense of accomplishment, but also humility.
He had survived the storm. Not alone, but with the guidance, wisdom, and support of Mika. He understood that his own experience, while valuable, had been enhanced and strengthened by hers. He felt gratitude for the partnership they had formed, a bond forged through trust, effort, and shared survival. When they finally reached the ranch, the sight of the familiar buildings and fences was comforting. John dismounted, stretching his sore muscles, and let Dusty rest. He turned to Mika, feeling a sense of deep respect and appreciation. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I don't know if I could have made it without you."
Mika smiled, her eyes calm and wise.
Psst. You survived because you were willing to learn and to stay close. The land, the storm, and your own experience all played a part. Bet. Remember this lesson, and it will guide you.
John nodded, feeling the truth of her words.
He realized that survival was not just about enduring a storm. It was about learning from it, respecting its power, and moving carefully with others who understood it. He understood now that pride, while useful, could not replace awareness, patience, and partnership. Inside the ranch, John tended to Dusty and checked on his supplies. The day's journey had left him exhausted, but also thoughtful. Psst. He reflected on the past days, the storm, the snow, the challenges, and the lessons. He understood now that survival was as much about mental strength as physical endurance. Awareness, careful observation, and the ability to adapt had been just as important as skill or experience. As evening fell, John and Mika sat together near the hearth inside the ranch, sharing a simple meal. The warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the cold they had endured, and the comfort of being inside brought a sense of safety and reflection. John listened as Mika spoke of the lessons of the land, the importance of patience, and the wisdom found in careful observation. He felt a deep respect for her knowledge, realizing that it was not just practical but also deeply connected to life, balance, and survival. That night, as John lay in his bed, he reflected on the journey. The storm had tested him in ways he had never imagined, challenging his strength, endurance, and pride. But it had also taught him invaluable lessons about trust, observation, patience, and the importance of moving together with others. He realized that survival was not just about enduring hardships. It was about learning from them, respecting the forces around you, and adapting to challenges with care and awareness. He thought about Mika, her calm guidance and the quiet strength she had shown. He understood now that the wisdom she shared was not just about surviving a storm. It was about living with respect for the land, understanding its signs, and moving carefully in harmony with it. The journey had changed him, teaching him humility and patience, and giving him a deeper appreciation for the natural world. The snow outside was quiet now, the wind gentle, and the ranch safe and warm. John knew that the challenges of the land would never truly end, but he felt prepared. He understood that survival was not about facing danger alone. It was about learning, adapting, and trusting those who had knowledge and experience to share. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for Mika, for Dusty, and for the lessons of the storm. In the following days, John returned to his work on the ranch, but he did so with new eyes. He observed the land carefully, noticed subtle signs in the weather and wildlife, and moved with patience and awareness. The lessons Mika had taught him became part of his daily life, guiding his actions and decisions. He felt a new sense of respect for the land and for the people who understood it deeply. Whenever he thought of the storm, John remembered Mika's words. We must stay close, watch each other, and respect the land. It teaches us if we are willing to listen. He realized that survival was not just a matter of strength or knowledge. It was about connection, awareness, humility, and the willingness to learn. The journey had changed him. John had faced the storm, learned to adapt, and survived with guidance, observation, and patience. He understood now that the land was a teacher, the storm a test, and the bond with Mika a vital part of his survival. He felt stronger, wiser, and more aware than ever before. And as he looked out over the snow-covered plains, John Carter knew that he would never forget the lessons of the storm, the importance of staying close, and the value of trust, guidance, and careful observation. Survival was not just about enduring the elements. It was about learning from them, respecting them, and moving through the world with humility, awareness, and connection.